That's not a real service dog. The restaurant manager snaps at the elderly man sitting quietly with his German Shepherd. 81-year-old Frank Miller feels every head turned toward him as the manager demands proof, unaware that in less than 5 minutes, this same dog would save his life in front of everyone watching. What happens next will leave you speechless about the bond between veterans and their service animals. If you believe every hero deserves respect, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments about a time an animal showed incredible loyalty. Frank Miller sat in the corner booth of Rosie's Diner, the same spot he had occupied every Tuesday morning for the past 3 years. At 81, routines kept him grounded. Same booth, same black coffee, same wheat toast with butter. And always with Duke, his German Shepherd service dog, lying quietly beside the table. Duke was 7 years old. Trained specifically for Frank's needs after his return from his 4th tour in Afghanistan. Frank had been a master sergeant, a career soldier who had seen more combat than most men twice his age. But it was that final tour, the roadside bomb that killed 3 of his men and left him with traumatic brain injury, that changed everything. TBI came with seizures. They could hit without warning, dropping him to the ground in violent convulsions that could last several minutes. The doctors had tried different medications, but nothing completely controlled them. That's when the VA suggested Duke. Duke had been trained to detect the subtle changes in Frank's scent and behavior that preceded a seizure. The dog could sense one coming up to 15 minutes before it hit, giving Frank time to get to a safe place and position himself to avoid injury. Duke had already saved Frank's life 17 times in the 3 years. They had been together, but most people didn't understand service dogs. They saw Duke's calm demeanor and assumed he was just a pet that Frank was sneaking into restaurants. Today was going to be one of those days. Frank was halfway through his toast when the new manager approached his table. The man was young, maybe 30, with perfectly styled hair and a crisp shirt that screamed authority. His name tag read Kevin, and he had the look of someone who enjoyed exercising power over others. "Excuse me, sir," Kevin said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Dogs aren't allowed in this restaurant unless they're legitimate service animals." Frank looked up from his breakfast, Duke's ears perking up at the change in his owner's stress level. "He's a service animal," Frank said quietly. Kevin crossed his arms and looked down at Duke with obvious skepticism. "Really? Because he doesn't look like any service dog I've ever seen. Where's his vest? Where are his papers?" Frank felt his chest tighten. This conversation always made his blood pressure spike, which was dangerous given his condition. "He doesn't need a vest by law," Frank explained patiently. "And I'm not required to show papers." "Look," Kevin said, his voice growing louder, "I've seen this scam before. People bring their pets everywhere and claim they're service dogs. It's illegal, and it's unfair to people with real disabilities." Other diners had stopped eating to watch the confrontation. An elderly couple 3 tables over whispered to each other while staring. A mother with 2 young children pointed at Duke and spoke quietly to her kids. The teenage waitress behind the counter watched with wide eyes. "I have a traumatic brain injury," Frank said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Duke is trained to detect seizures before they happen." Kevin said sarcastically. "And I suppose you have seizures that conveniently happen when you need to bring your dog places?" The comment hit Frank like a physical blow. He had earned 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star in his 30-year military career. He had led men into battle, saved lives under fire, and served his country with honor and distinction. But to this young man, he was just another faker trying to game the system. "Sir, this is really a service dog," Frank said, his hands beginning to shake slightly. Duke noticed immediately, moving closer to Frank's legs and pressing against them. Kevin saw the movement and smirked. "Oh, now he's performing tricks? Look, I don't know what you trained your pet to do, but this is a restaurant, not a dog park. Either you can prove he's a legitimate service animal, or you both need to leave. Frank felt his vision starting to blur slightly around the edges. His heart was racing, and a familiar metallic taste was creeping into his mouth. These were the early warning signs he had learned to recognize, but Duke had sensed them long before Frank was consciously aware. The German Shepherd stood up abruptly and began pawing at Frank's leg with increasing urgency. Duke's behavior changed completely from the calm, invisible presence he had been to an alert, focused animal trying desperately to get his handler's attention. See? Kevin said triumphantly, pointing at Duke's agitated behavior. That's not how a real service dog acts. Real service dogs are calm and well-behaved. Your dog is clearly untrained and disruptive. A woman at a nearby table, who had been watching the entire exchange, stood up to intervene. That dog is trying to tell him something, she said firmly. I think you should listen. Please don't interfere, Kevin warned her. I'm handling this situation. But Duke's behavior was becoming more frantic. The dog was now alternating between pawing at Frank's leg and nudging his hand with his nose. Duke began to whine softly, a sound he rarely made unless the situation was urgent. Frank tried to speak, to explain what was happening, but the words wouldn't come clearly. The metallic taste in his mouth was stronger now, and his vision was tunneling. He had maybe 2 minutes before the seizure hit full force. That's it, Kevin announced loudly. I'm calling the police. This is clearly a fake service dog, and you're disturbing other customers. Duke's training kicked into overdrive. The dog positioned himself directly in front of Frank, blocking his path to the hard tile floor. Duke began to bark sharp, urgent barks that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like an alarm. Control your dog, Kevin shouted over the barking. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No trained service dog would behave like this. But the woman who had spoken earlier was now on her feet, moving toward Frank's table. I know what I'm seeing, she called out. That dog is trying to help him. Something's wrong. Frank felt the familiar electric sensation starting in his fingertips, spreading up his arms toward his chest. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Duke sensed the escalation and positioned himself even more protectively, his body creating a barrier between Frank and the restaurant floor. Duke began to perform a specific behavior he had been trained for, using his body to guide Frank into a safer position. The dog gently but firmly pushed against Frank's legs, trying to get him to slide down from the booth seat to the floor where Duke could better protect him during the seizure. Get that animal away from him, Kevin yelled, completely misreading the situation. He's attacking the customer, but Frank was beyond responding now. The seizure was beginning, starting with violent tremors in his hands that quickly spread through his entire body. Duke immediately went into his emergency protocol, positioning his body to cushion Frank's head and prevent injury as the convulsions began. The restaurant fell silent except for the sounds of Frank's seizure and Duke's steady, protective presence. The German Shepherd lay partially under Frank's head and shoulders, absorbing the impact of the violent movements while staying perfectly still. Himself, Kevin's face went white as he realized what he was witnessing. The other diners watched in stunned silence as Duke performed exactly the way a highly trained service animal should, protecting his handler with calm precision despite the chaos around him. The seizure lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Duke remained motionless throughout, serving as a living cushion while monitoring Frank's breathing and maintaining his protective position. When the convulsions finally stopped, Duke began gently licking Frank's face, a trained behavior designed to help bring his handler back to consciousness. Frank's eyes fluttered open to find Duke's face inches from his own, the dog's tail wagging softly with relief. Around them, the entire restaurant was silent, every person staring at the incredible display of training and devotion they had just witnessed. The woman who had tried to intervene earlier was now kneeling beside them. Are you okay? She asked gently. "Should I call an ambulance?" Frank slowly sat up with Duke's help, the dog positioning himself to provide support. "I'm okay," Frank managed to say, his voice weak but clear. "This happens sometimes. Duke takes care of me." Kevin stood frozen several feet away, his face pale with the realization of how badly he had misjudged the situation. Every person in the restaurant now understood exactly what they had witnessed, not a fake service dog, but a highly trained lifesaver performing exactly as he was supposed to. The elderly woman from 3 tables over approached with tears in her eyes. "Young man," she said to Kevin, her voice shaking with emotion, "you just watched that dog save this gentleman's life. Maybe next time you'll think twice before questioning someone's service animal." Kevin could only nod, speechless in the face of his own ignorance and the heroic performance he had just witnessed. Frank slowly stood with Duke's assistance, the dog staying close to monitor for any signs of another episode. The restaurant remained silent as Frank and Duke made their way toward the exit, every eye following their progress with newfound respect and understanding. What had started as public humiliation had become a powerful demonstration of the incredible bond between a veteran and his service dog. As they reached the door, Frank turned back to Kevin one last time. "His name is Duke," Frank said quietly. "He's saved my life 17 times now. 18, counting today. And with that, they walked out into the morning sunlight, leaving behind a restaurant full of people who would never again question the legitimacy of a service animal, and a manager who had learned the hardest lesson of his career about the cost of prejudice and the power of true service.